Okay, so welcome to the ZotHacks 2020 Front-End Workshop Series. I'm Lasse, and I'm going to be going through all of the different elements of front-end in this video. And in later videos, we're going to go over the specific ZotHacks project that we'll be building and the different elements and libraries that make it up, as well as finish off with a coding segment, so that way you guys are all ramped up before ZotHacks, where we'll do a live demo and live coding session to kind of build out the final parts of this project. So a quick outline of what I'm going to go over. First, I'm just going to go over web development in general, why we're choosing web development for this project, and then I'll kind of lead into the specific languages that we'll be building for front-end web development. And after talking about those and how they integrate together, we'll go through the different resources that you guys can use to answer any questions that you might have, learn a little bit more about web development, and talk about how you'll kind of pursue finishing up your projects when you guys get a little more freedom to work on things past this workshop series. So for this specific workshop, we're going to be going over the front-end element of an application. This will focus on the user interaction with the interactivity. We're not going to be focusing on the back-end part for this. For that, you can check out the back-end workshop series that Tristan is leading. Those things will kind of all come together with our workshop series, so you can kind of build a full-stack application before you even start ZotHacks, so you guys are nice and well prepared for building your own projects. So here is an example and like a picture of the final result of what we're going to be building. This is the page where we're going to show a stock view. We'll also have a list of users that have their own favorite stocks, so we can get a little bit of relational database mapping. We'll talk about the different elements that kind of lead into making this page. Specifically in the next video, we're going to talk about like what elements build up this page. But for this one, we're just going to be going over general front-end web development information. So web development, and specifically in terms of front end. So front ends are for handling the user interaction. This kind of encompasses the user experience, the user interface, visualizing any data, and the user interactivity with the page. Front ends can interact with a backend. This is optional, but if you want to have like your own data, displaying a certain type of data, or having things served onto the page, you're going to build a backend API, and we'll talk a little bit more about the communication between the two in the later videos and in the backend workshop. So the main element of a front end is that it's interactive. You'll be able to scroll, click buttons, view information, and front ends are made up of three main components: the HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript. So we'll kind of go over in this video over the three main elements and languages and talk about what they're kind of used for to get you guys started. And feel free to skip ahead if you have this information already. Feel free to watch it if you want to do a quick overview. So specifically for this project, why do we want to pick web development? So this is kind of hackathon propaganda. Most people at hackathons build their projects with web development to build web applications. And there's a few really good reasons for this. The first is that it's accessible and not tied to any device. You'll see like building a Swift application for iOS or an Android application, there's a lot of emulator work that you need to do, and they might be limited to specific computers. Any application with a browser will be able to access it, mobile or not, or you can have like Linux boxes that serve it. There's just a lot of open-ended to who gets to view the web application, and that's a really big bonus for when we're building something that can serve multiple purposes. And it's also because web development applications are kind of pushing normal applications out of relevance. Applications used to be built with Java and C to run on Windows and iOS before like Swift came up, or Mac OS. And the reason web development is kind of serving this out is because they're getting a lot more efficient to run. They have a lot more modern features, and another reason is that you can kind of abstract the information away from this application. So for the user information on here, you don't necessarily need to have them stored on a computer. Using a backend, you can store information about the front end, specifically to the user. So if you wanted to run an application, let's say like Gmail, you can do it viewing the same information on multiple computers. So you can check on your phone or your laptop or your desktop computer, and it'll all kind of hold that information in one central spot because it's utilizing the backend for storing things. Another reason for why we're doing this for our workshop series is specifically because web development is the most common internship stack. So as you're applying for internships, general software engineering internships will most likely involve some element of web development, whether that is backend APIs or front-end stacks. This will kind of be the main resume booster that you can use to build personal projects, just because a lot of internship applications will require this. And they might require things further with like React or Angular or just general web development, native JavaScript code. But we'll kind of teach you React specifically because we feel like that's the best oriented for beginners, and also there's a lot of scalability and lots of internship applications that require it. And also because web development has a lot of really good resources for viewing information. Just Googling questions, you can kind of learn everything that you need to for the job just through Googling and working on personal projects. So, we kind of just want to get you guys to the point where you have an idea and you kind of know the steps that you need to Google to make something happen. So going into the languages, HTML is our general templating language. This is going to be used for structuring the page. We can see a little coding example right here for visualizing, maybe a header and a subheader, and then like a tiny little caption information. And we can see that the HTML kind of chooses what's on the page and kind of a rough ordering top down before we kind of get into how CSS interacts with it. But HTML would be the page that you template and show what's going to be on the page. Here we can start to see classes like ZotHacks wrapper and ZotHacks information. The CSS classes will determine the styling of the components themselves and the child components. So getting it a little more into CSS, the CSS will ultimately style the HTML and control the visual aspect. Here we can see, like the card wrapper, maybe has a specific background color. We have some classes that justify where the child items will be located. We can also show some subclasses, so we can say that like the color of the text will be black, and then we can also define like the sizing and maybe some different coloring for the different elements in those subclasses. And all of these classes are kind of difficult to remember at first, but as you start working with these, you'll be writing a lot of CSS classes, and improvement will come really quick. As you start to remember more and more elements, it's ultimately just a practice makes perfect scenario. And CSS is HTML's best friend. They work hand in hand to build the pages that you want to structure. So JavaScript. JavaScript is the language that we'll be using to introduce that interactivity element of the page and allow you to control the HTML and maybe even CSS a little more granularly. Specifically talking about language capabilities, it allows dynamic typing. So, rather than having ints and strings, you'll have just var to handle everything. And this can be just a JSON object, or, an integer, or, an object ID, really anything you want to put in there. And that adds a lot of flexibility for building our structured front ends. JavaScript kind of controls the behind the scenes. You can kind of think of it as this cool and hip professor. It's pretty chill, and it tells the HTML and CSS what to do. And in terms of like just our language semantics, most of you guys will probably be in ICS 31 through 33, or maybe you've taken 46 like Java or C++. Think of JavaScript as just Python in terms of like dynamic typing and language capabilities, but it's a little more syntax. So, we can kind of see that it has the dynamic typing, but kind of follows a very similar development pattern as Java, where you have these structured for loops, not as clean pseudocode syntax as Python. But still you don't need to define certain return types, and there's a lot of flexibility that we gain from this. And the way this interacts is you kind of tie events between different things. So we kind of will have JavaScript sitting in a file somewhere, and we can connect that to a button. So on clicking the button, we can run this function hello ZotHacks, and this will go and print in the console all of the different usernames from an array that we have. And that's kind of like how we get into interacting with the page. You kind of use HTML to define JavaScript actions, and the JavaScript actions will define what changes on the page. So some resources that you guys should check out for this process and throughout the development. I recommend the Microsoft MDN web docs. This actually should be Mozilla MDN web docs. There's a lot of really good, helpful information on the modern capabilities of the different languages that you'll be using. If you Google anything, you'll most likely see W3 Schools pop up. There's a lot of really good resources there. CSS Tricks is another great site for specific CSS questions. And lastly, or second to last, we have Flexbox Froggy and CSS Grid Garden. These are two websites that have online games that teach you how to use Flexbox and CSS Grid. And I highly recommend everybody at ZotHacks go through these two games. They take about maybe 15 to 20 minutes each, but it'll really nail in the capabilities of ordering different HTML elements using CSS. So after doing these things, you'll kind of have an idea of how to place elements using that CSS, and you'll be able to go from imagining the structure of your website to just making it happen on the page. And then of course, we have Google. Any questions that you might have, the first thing to do is Google it. Becoming a Google expert is kind of key number one in being a good web developer, because there's so many different parts. And then of course, if you guys have any specific questions, feel free to reach out to me through the Discord or the mentors chat, or just any way you can find me. And we'll have tons of mentors available on the HackUCI Discord. You guys can sign up through that on the HackUCI website. So kind of next we'll go for our presentation, we'll go into React specifically, and why React is a really good platform for learning web development and building a full stack application.